right, so we decided to dedicate a whole episode to this subject because so much has happened in the 2 weeks or so since we took our Christmas break, and it's just so weird. You guys have been following this Wisła story, right?
There's been a lot of doings that transpiring and all right.
Good God,
I've completely lost track.
We need like a laugh track. It's a sitcom. It's completely ridiculous. And
I was catching up yesterday. I think I'd missed about 4 or 5 days of developments. I was laughing out loud. I could not believe some of the stuff I was reading. It reads like a comedy farce.
It does, and it's probably going to get worse before.
Take us through the timeline, John.
Let's recap. All right, so Wisła's financial trouble started some time ago. They stopped paying their players in July or August. And in the second half of 2018, they started meeting with an embarrassingly long list of potential investors. And all these investors would make a big deal about their plans to save this icon of Polish sport, symbol of the city of Krakow, et cetera, et cetera. The plans to invest all this money and turn the ship around. Well, when they came to do their due diligence and met with the club officers, they quietly disappeared after having a up close look at the accounting books. So there's something in there that scares the hell out of anybody who's going to put real money in there. Are you trying to accuse the
upper levels of Wisla's bureaucracy of incompetence?
Yeah. Well, more than that, I think.
Are you saying that there's something financially wrong with a football club?
No. So one investor after another says, "Yeah, no thanks." They walk away. And it gets to a crisis point. Wisła's back is up against the wall. A deadline imposed by, I think, PZPN, the Polish Football Authority. So they have to sort out this financial mess and resolve their debts, or they won't be eligible to play in the Ekstraklasa, that's the highest level of Polish football, in the spring session. So the second week of December comes around, and they're, I think, 72 hours away from this drop-dead deadline. And two comic book characters appear riding into the scene to save the day. International men of mystery, right? One guy, his name's Vanna Lee. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's spelled L-Y. In the Polish TV, they're saying Lee.
I think that's as clear as you can be.
Let's call him Vanna Lee. Cambodian, French citizenship, apparently ties to the Cambodian royal family, apparently an investor in football all over the planet.
Tied to them how? You're either a member of the royal family or
exactly.
you're not.
That was the Polish media's question too. Like, what exactly is your connection to the Cambodian royal family? They never got an answer to that.
Our dogs are related.
So apparently he's invested in football clubs all over the world, and he's got this academy in China, the football academy, with 2,500 players, and which is weird
that's just like a school team in China.
Yeah. Which is weird because Google knew nothing about this guy. For someone who has these interests all over the world, Google had never heard of him. So that's one part of the equation. The other side is a guy. What was his name? Mats Harding. He's Swedish. But he runs a company that's registered in the UK. Dave, what did we find out about this so-called company in the UK?
That it's based in Stourbridge in the West Midlands.
Yeah, it's like a registers at one of these addresses. Yeah,
we didn't find out much. We're not exactly, you
pay like
journalists.
£50 a year, and that's your address in the UK. And it's
set up a few companies that don't have much money flowing through them. He's closed a few companies. Maybe he's a big deal. I don't know, but nobody's ever heard of him in the UK. This story's attracted zero attention in the football press in the UK.
Doesn't matter at all. There was one story in the Polish media I saw where somebody tracked down his records. If you have a company in the UK, your records are accessible through something called the Customs House record. So what's it called?
Yeah, Customs House.
Customs House.
Company's House.
Company's House. Sorry, Company's House. And the turnover of his company was something like £200,000. Okay, that's a lot of money to have in your hand, but in the context of buying a football club, not really a lot of cash.
It's kind of just what I said there a minute ago, wasn't it?
So we got the Cambodian mystery man and the Swedish guy with the English company who doesn't really make a lot of money and is registered at this kind of fake address. And
wasn't there another guy?
Save the day. Huh?
Another person, a facilitator or something?
Yeah, there's a guy, there was a Polish guy that was kind of acting as a facilitator trying to get things done. He was going to be their man at Wisła if things worked out, Adam Piotrowski is his name. He's a local lawyer. He's kind of the broker in the whole thing. He's kind of guiding the deal through City Hall and kind of, he's kind of their local man to make sure the whole deal gets done. So anyway, Mats Harding and Vanna Lee come to Krakow. They meet with Jacek Majchrowski, the mayor, which kind of gives the whole thing an air of legitimacy. He's kind of like giving them their blessing, right? And behind closed doors, they assure him that they have this money and they have these big plans for, the club, and everything's going to be okay. And Majorowski, again, de facto gives them his blessing by, meeting with them and having their picture taken together. Speaking of pictures, you guys see these pictures, all the pictures that were taken just outside of Majorowski's office when the guys came. They all look like the kind of picture you'd see if on the news they said, authorities are looking for this man, kind of thing. They all look very dodgy. Vanelli is always holding an umbrella in front of his face, avoiding the camera. In fact, Piotrowski, the Polish lawyer that they're using to broker the whole thing, he even asked the press to not take pictures, saying, and this is a quote, that Mr. Lee is very sensitive to cameras and lights.
I mean, I can understand being sensitive to lights, but to cameras, it's like,
I don't know.
I don't like it when an electronic sensor picks up photos that have bounced off my face. It's how does that work? The physics there of being.
So they come to Krakow. They meet with the mayor. Everything's set up, and the deal was that by midnight on December 28th, that the company, Vanelli's company, would transfer a symbolic one zloty to Wisła's bank account, which would then soon be followed by 12 million real money, 12 million zlotys to clear debts. And then later in 2019, even bigger money for all these huge investments they were going to make. So
on the land they didn't own.
So the clock starts ticking. The clock starts ticking. Now, let me ask you something, Dave. Let's say you're involved in a deal like this, and you're the buyer. You've agreed to pay this money by midnight on a certain day. Would you wait until the last minute to make the transfer? Or would you, as a show of good faith, just go ahead and pay it off?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have set up some procedure, wouldn't you, where it was just triggered by your law firm. I mean, it's very, very unusual to have a deal fall through like this. Wouldn't look good at all, I'd say.
I mean, I think it's a bad sign.
Patting his pockets, all like, damn,
a couple don't want to be
pair of trousers.
It's not for the greatest reasons in the world,
I think it's a bad sign that they didn't even pay off the symbolic one zloty. If I had a chance right now to go out there and symbolically buy Wisła,
can we renegotiate?
I'd buy it, even though I wouldn't pay off their debts. I just buy it to say that technically I own the football club for 15 minutes.
Sherlock still unsuccessfully sitting on the toilet.
Well, brace yourselves for some shocking news. Midnight comes around.
This is where it actually gets mad.
Midnight comes around on December 28th,
it's been pretty
and
clear.
Nothing happens. No proof of the transfer. And I imagined one of the lawyers of Wisła sitting on his laptop and clicking refresh every 10 seconds on the bank account. Is it there? Is it there? Is it there?
Checking
it's
the
not
mailbox.
there.
Is the mail? Is the check in the mail yet? Yeah.
And so the morning of the 29th, which was a Saturday, comes around, and Wisła says, "No, we've not received confirmation." Now, this is where they kept using the same phrase: "We've not received confirmation of the transfer." They never said anything about contacting Vanelli. He's this big financier. Surely he has an office somewhere. He has people. They didn't say a thing about getting word from him or trying to contact him. It was like, we're waiting for confirmation. Just like, as I said, clicking refresh on their bank account screen every 10 seconds and just, crossing their fingers. But nothing happened. So Wisła graciously agrees to extend the deadline by one day to midnight on the 29th. Because, hey, it was a weekend. It wasn't a business day. So, maybe there was some kind of delay.
I have to break the drama. He doesn't pay.
He did not pay. He did not pay. But the funniest part, the Monday, the 31st comes around. And Wisła, idiots that they are, they're still holding out hope, saying, you know what? Today, that's the Monday the 31st. This is the first business day after the deadline for the transfer of the 28th. Maybe today it'll show up. I mean, God, it's pathetic. So yeah,
and it didn't.
It didn't. And here we are, almost a week later. It still hasn't shown up. Okay, so where does this leave Krakow, Wisła Krakow? Well, they had a news
presumably
conference.
they didn't actually hand over any kind of documents or valuable kind of assets in exchange for this you mean? Sorry, am I
Let's take a slight detour here, Dr. Mike. Tell us.
It's such a shit show. We forgot one lump there, people. Nice work, Josh.
Tell us about this interesting angle with the shares of the club.
Well, technically, whenever you buy something like a club, there are shares, paperwork, documentation. That proves that you're the owner, like you have your paperwork for your car or for whatever. So usually in this kind of situation, that documentation is held by a notary until the payment goes through, and then the notary passes it on to the new owners. They apparently just stuck it in a briefcase and flew back to Cambodia with it. So there was a moment where without paying for the football club, they actually had all the paperwork apparently that entitled them to say that they are the owners. I mean, after a while, after a couple of days, the team said like, no, since they didn't fulfill the legal obligations, all that paperwork, all those contracts are null and void. But there was a moment where it was like, in a gray area. It's like they kind of have the keys to the building,
Would have been a mute point anyway if they've no intention of ever coming back. So
wasn't it kind of like selling somebody your car and giving them the keys and saying, "No, you're going to pay me, right?"
So, John, tell our listeners what did Vanna Lee's people finally come out with?
Well, here's the thing. I think it was also on Monday the 31st, where Wisła. This is coming from Wisła. They say. We have received an explanation for the failure to receive the transfer on Friday the 28th. Apparently, during a transatlantic flight on that weekend, Saturday the 29th, Mr. Lee became very, very ill. Very ill, and was out of touch, and that's why the transfer wasn't made.
Too many
that's
people
why we didn't get the money.
Of him.
He got ill from
the Beagles didn't
camera
agree
flash bulbs
and
or
the dog
something.
ate his homework. Yeah.
And so they were really standing by this pathetic explanation for a short time that the whole deal got held up because Mr. Lee became ill on a transatlantic flight. So we don't know where he was going, what happened when he got to the airport, why his phone doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all they kept saying for that Monday.
So what's Adam Piotrowski saying now? What's coming next?
Well, things are kind of blowing up in a new direction now, because now it seems like Matt Harding is claiming to have no idea what happened. He was shocked, genuinely shocked at his former partner's actions, Vanna Lee's actions. And Piotrowski and Harding kind of going at each other as well?
No, I don't think so.
No? Are they on the same side of this?
I think they're on the same side. They were outside the court saying that they're going to sue Vanna Lee and that they're trying to resurrect the deal, and they hope to find a replacement buyer in the next few days and to have a big announcement soon. So they're not even giving up the ghost, impressively.
Yeah, but there's
and they've appointed some new young bucko as president, haven't they, in an unpaid role.
I think that's pretty much the only kind of role you can get with Wisła these days.
They're going to relocate to Stourbridge in the West Midlands, I believe. Is
entirely possible. Everything's on the
been
table.
Completely, really confusing with all the board of directors.
But it gets worse. It gets worse. Check this out. A few days ago, Wisła had a kind of a press conference where they claimed that they were kind of putting all their cards on the table. It was, okay, here's the situation. This is where we are right now.
And was Sarapata still in charge?
Sarapata's gone by then. Let me get to her in just a second. During this news conference, Wisła says they have 51,000 zlotys in the bank.
Yeah, I saw
51,
that.
that's about 10,000 pounds, let's call it, right? Now, again, a lot of money to have in your hand, but in the big picture, if you're a football club, it's a joke. That's, that's what you spend on office supplies and your groundskeepers and things like that, right? Check this out. Wisła's
51,000 zloty on pens, my God.
Okay, they're really nice pens. Wisła has a total debt of about 40 million zlotys. They have 6 million outstanding just in payroll for their players since last summer. Again, 51,000 zlotys in the bank, 1.2 monthly going forward, 1.2 million zlotys monthly, 123,000 for each home match. Of course, there are expenses for away matches and the various administration and all the people it takes to keep the stadium up and running and the organization going. And they have 51,000 zlotys in the bank. How is that even possible? Any clue?
I'm guessing there are bank accounts of certain private individuals that aren't so empty right now.
Yeah, let's talk about those private individuals. Margina Sharapata, who until recently was the chairman or the chairwoman of the club, she resigned, shockingly, a few days ago. One of her last acts, maybe her last official act as chairman of the club, was to take the revenue that the club earned from a home match with Lech Poznan at the beginning of December. The club netted about 400,000 zlotys. She took 300,000 of that and wired it to the Association of Wisła Kraków supporters, which, to put it bluntly, is the hooligan element, basically. Now, on paper, this association, these are the people who organize the big banners that you see at the matches. They do the oprawy. What's the English word for oprawy? Kind of like the cheering and the chanting.
Yeah, exactly.
The visual show. The show. 300,000. Now, you have to be extremely naive to think that the hooligan element in the club doesn't have their tentacles all over this money.
Aren't they already in some kind of administration from the tax services? Those decisions get taken out of your hands when you're in.
They owe their players 6 million zlotys.
Yeah.
They owe the city God knows how much
there
money.
are laws, establishing priority and guidelines.
Of course. And the chairwoman of the club is wiring money to the hooligans.
This sounds really dodgy.
This is serious. This is serious. This is prosecutor stuff right here. Also, she paid her company owned by her husband 60,000 zlotys for printing, I guess you call it the match day program.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? I think it's worth giving our listeners who haven't heard our previous pieces on Wisła a little bit of colour on Miss Sharapata. A little bit of history. Just a quick one, John.
She first gained notoriety when she's a lawyer by profession, and she defended in a criminal trial the guy who everybody knows is the head of the Wisła Sharks hooligan element. His street name is Mishek, a teddy bear.
What a great nickname.
Takes the edge off of his bad image, I guess. But
I like it. That's really trending.
In a match, and you guys might remember, this was a European match against Lazio, I think, where he threw a knife and by some miracle hit
Dino Baggio.
Dino Baggio. In what was that, 99?
Around then,
something like that. And they somehow identified him. He's brought up in criminal charges. She defended him. And now here she is all these years later as the chairwoman of the club. Again, it just makes it all that much more obvious that...
I think she was a lawyer too on the Euro 2012 bid as well.
Entirely possible. But it just makes it obvious that, she's in bed, metaphorically speaking, with the hooligan element and channeling money to them.
Those accusations have been leveled at her time and again. So, I think it's fair to...
Well, the first of what are sure to be many, many petitions have come to the prosecutor's office this week alleging various forms of wrongdoing and criminal mismanagement in the club. We'll see what comes of that. There's an interesting kind of a subtext to a lot of the stories you read about the prosecutor and the police when it comes to investigating Wisła. There's a hesitancy in the prosecutor's office to dive too deep into this, which just invites all kinds of conspiracy theories about why that is.
They don't need a conspiracy theory. They know they're going to find some shit and it's going to be very uncomfortable for some powerful people, and naturally you just kind of shy away from an investigation like that. I don't think it's any grand conspiracy.
Well, that's
it's
certainly
just
part of it, but the conspiracy part comes from, who are the people inside the Wisła organization, the Wisła hooligan organization, who have stories to tell about the prosecutors? And they're friends in the prosecutors, and they're friends in the police.
As
and
much as I appreciate you putting your tinfoil hat on, let's focus on the facts here. What comes next for Wisła now? Are we talking about bankruptcy, losing the license to play in the Ekstraklasa, move down to the 4th division?
All of that's on the table. They've got lots of things to worry about now.
And what would happen to the stadium in that scenario? Is there any way the stadium would just pass into the possession of the city? Or
I think the city does have full, ownership rights and control. They kind of lease it to Wisła. They're the landlord, so to speak, for Wisła Kraków.
They're in the 4th division. Maybe Cracovia would lend them the ground.
Well, that'd be hilarious if Cracovia ended up buying Wisła.
Their biggest problem now is holding on to their players. Some of the players are eligible to walk away without penalty from their contracts now.
They gone.
The few remaining who are not yet eligible will be free to leave, I think, on the January 16th. So Wisła's number one problem, actually they have 5 or 6 number one problems right now, is keeping their squad together, giving their players a reason to stay here after not being paid for 5 or 6 months.
Hold on a second. If they're going down to the 4th division, they'd have to release them anyway. They won't be able to pay players on that money. They're talking about totally, if you get relegated down that far, my question would be, do you still need to play in a stadium that size? Could they use Hootnick's ground? Could they really go back to basics?
Like jumpers on Bonnier, I think. Would be.
Are they going to leave the stadium there to just, rot?
Well, look, whatever happens, as I've always told you, John, football clubs don't die. They go bankrupt, they go out of business, they get passed around from Billy to Jack by dodgy people from Cambodia, and my own beloved Liverpool were hijacked by 2 financiers from Texas who leveraged their club so badly it nearly went bankrupt. These things happen. And always football clubs seem to bounce back. They just have this built-in fabric of a culture. They have a brand. They have followers. Even if Wisła, the worst happens and they get down to playing, and by the way, people, the 4th division in Poland is a seriously humiliating level to be reduced to. I mean, you're talking a few hundred people max at these games.
They play between parked cars.
Yeah.
This has happened before. This is an interesting point that somebody raised. This is not an unusual occurrence in Polish football. Even some of the most iconic clubs with a long history and whatnot run into these problems, kind of self-inflicted problems.
Exactly.
Polonia Warsaw was relegated all the way down. Both clubs in Łódź, both had really great accomplished histories, from especially from the 1970s. Liquidation, the same thing. So it happens. And so this idea that somehow Wisła should be immune from this, or they can't possibly be punished for these crimes, really is ridiculous and unfair.
Yeah, I'd say just my only point is that they're not going to go out of existence. They will eventually rise back up through the divisions, and eventually we'll get back to a semblance of what they once were. It's just a question of how long it takes.
Well, that's where things stand at the moment. Who knows? By the time we publish this, maybe another international man of mystery will emerge from somewhere. And we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this. But this is a very, very big deal. If you haven't heard about the story, it's hard to really convey just how shocking this is. It would be the equivalent of a Manchester United or a Barcelona suddenly being sold off for scrap parts.
We haven't even mentioned the fact that right now we don't exactly know who even owns the football team. It's like they're in the middle of like this weird nebulous kind of gray area where there was like 2 board of directors voted in. Nobody wanted to be the chairperson in charge of the company. Right now, the Polish soccer league, so the PZPN, basically says like, we're suspending your license because we don't exactly know who the license holder is.
It's that bad. It's just that bad.
Nobody wants to admit to being in charge of it right now.
In the history of comical football clusterfucks, this is right up there in the top 5.
Well, anybody listening, if you've got a few $100s put together, you might be in a position to buy yourself a football club. So look them up on Facebook. Oh, great. Did you see the image I sent you guys? Somebody put together on the internet. On a Facebook page for a product, there's a button that says, buy now, kup teraz, right? And somebody put, Photoshop one of those onto the Wisła Kraków Facebook page.
I saw that.
Absolutely fantastic. Anyway, keep an eye on this.
We should start like a GoFundMe page for Wisła.
GoFundMe. Exactly. Anyway, keep an eye out, and we'll keep you updated on the mess.
Kudos to whoever displayed such graphic wit.